I hope everybody gave me their email address, because if you didn't give me your email address, you probably didn't hear anything from me. So if you didn't give me your email address, just make sure I have it by the time you leave today. I think I have almost everybody's email. Also, there's another set of rules if you weren't here last week or you forgot the rules that I gave out last week. I have more sets over there that you can borrow. Also, there's some snacks. I realize this is Ash Wednesday, but some of us might be over 59. And you're technically exempt from, just guessing, okay? I'm just guessing. But if you want a snack, please help yourself over there. There's also waters in the fridge. 59, over 59. So, but anyway, it's all over there if anybody cares to have something. All right, and we're gonna go ahead and get started with the next set of rules. So, okay, this is, we're going to recap here from what there were in the first ones. I hope everybody who wasn't here was able to watch the first videos about St. Ignatius and who he was and where these rules came from. Thank you, Judy. Thank you.
It came over well.
Oh, good. Good, I'm glad. I will try to post these by Thursday evening latest. You should have them by Thursday morning in case you missed it. And I have them up on Facebook also if anybody wants me. I could use more than 5 followers, just in case you're in the mood. Okay. All right, just recapping. Rule 1 teaches us about how those going from mortal sin to mortal sin, and the good spirit stings and bites them to encourage them to leave that sinful life pattern. Okay, so so if somebody's, like St. Ignatius started out, St. Augustine started out, and the good spirit, you just have poking holes in their life saying, why are we doing this? Why don't we do better? We can do better. We can do better. And finally, the person will take that and run with it. And that's when they turn to rule 2. And rule 2 is those who are doing good by trying to grow closer to God. The enemy then will sting and bite. However, the good spirit is always present to assist us in our persistence to become closer to God. Okay, so that's rule 1 and rule 2 that we went over last week in depth. And as I said, anybody who's watching this or needs to see those and you didn't get the link, let me know. Just send me an email and I will check into that. Okay, we're going to work on rule 3 here. The third is of spiritual consolation. And this is from Ignatius. This is as exact a translation from the Spanish as possible. I call it consolation when some interior movement is caused in the soul, through which the soul comes to be inflamed with love of its Creator and Lord, and consequently when it can love no created thing in the face of the earth in itself, but only in the Creator of them all. Likewise, when it sheds tears that move to love of its Lord, whether out of sorrow for one's sins, or for the passion of Christ our Lord, or because of other things directly ordered to his service and praise. Finally, I call consolation every increase of hope, faith, and charity, and all interior joy that calls and attracts to heavenly things and to the salvation of one's soul, quieting and giving it peace in its Creator. So we're going to take that apart and learn not exactly, okay, this is like I said, there have been volumes and volumes and volumes written about these 12 rules. So we're going to skim the surface, but I'm going to give you an idea of what he's talking about here. Okay, so can anybody give me an example of what a consolation is? I really would like to hear more from you than I did in the first time because we were kind of rushed to get all the information in the first time. But who has an idea of what a consolation is? An experience that is a consolation. Does anybody have any clues?
I'm going to guess.
Yeah.
If you are looking at a rainbow after a storm, and you see how beautiful it is, but instead of, you appreciate the beauty of it, but I always think of God.
Yeah.
So to me, that would be a spiritual consolation.
Yeah, a rainbow. That was one of God's promises, right? After the flood was the rainbow. So that is a source of consolation to you. That's great. Does anybody else think of any experience? Yeah, Tina?
What about an answer to prayer?
An answer to prayer, exactly. That is a great consolation when you realize, usually in hindsight, right, that a prayer has been answered, and it's amazing. Anybody else have an experience like that? Mary, you're thinking.
I was saying
Oh.
I did.
Okay. What's your name again? I'm sorry.
Michelle.
Michelle.
I went through a really terrible surgery and something that was very life-threatening, and I had a whole bunch of very spiritual people praying for me, and everything worked out fine, and I'm fine now.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
So that was
a terrible
amazing.
surgery,
Yes.
and then you just lots of people praying, and you could feel the effects of the prayer, and that must have been such a consolation.
Yes, it was.
So that's great. So we kind of mixed up a little bit. We were talking. Terry was talking about rainbows, and that's called a non-spiritual consolation. Except you were thinking about God too. You connected it to God. And then Tina, you said, what did you say?
Answered prayers.
Answered prayers, that's also, okay, these are all spiritual consolations. I can think of non-spiritual consolations such as the birth of a grandchild. That's pretty incredible. I mean, those of you who are grandparents, when you hold your baby's baby, there's just nothing like that. Something else, a work of art. When you walk into St. James and you see the renovation that they did, to me it was breathtaking. I mean, even though that was a church, that was a non-spiritual consolation to see that beauty and how it draws you to God. So if you have the non-spiritual consolations, okay, they can lead to the spiritual consolations. And we just mentioned a couple spiritual consolations here. An answered prayer is a spiritual consolation. It could be when my granddaughter was born, I went down to watch her a couple times a month, and because they needed help watching her. And so I go to daily mass down there, and I walk in with this baby, newborn baby. She was 6 pounds, ½ ounce. And the priest comes back after mass and said, okay, what's the scoop for this baby? So I said, well, my daughter was non-practicing, and I said, I really want her to be baptized. And 2 years later, she was baptized in that church, and that was just an incredible answer to prayer and a spiritual consolation to me. But the consolations that are non-spiritual can lead to the spiritual consolations if we give proper thanks to God for that, and we recognize the answer to the prayers. So. Okay, and this is the amazing thing. Terry, look at this. Have you seen this before?
Yeah.
Hey there. Make sure you grab a piece of paper, one of the rules over there. So, nice to meet you. Who are you?
Katie and Tony Miley.
Oh, okay. It's nice to see your faces. Great. I'm glad you made it. Okay, we were in Nazareth, right? And we went into this church, and I had already put this picture up here. And we walked into the church, and there was the original painting. I was like, it blew my mind. And I'm like, is this the original? And the guide said, yes. And I said, I'm using that picture. It was just amazing. Okay, consolation. All right. Yeah. So this is in Nazareth. I forget, it was at Tagba that we were at. I know it was right off the Sea of Galilee.
No, not.
Yeah. It was right. I mean, all those towns are so close together. I get them so mixed up. Okay, but we're going to talk about the hemorrhaging woman here a little bit. Okay, this is a woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years and had endured much at the hands of many physicians and had spent all that she had and was not helped at all, but instead had become worse. After hearing about Jesus, she came up in the crowd behind him and touched his cloak. For she had been saying to herself, if I just touched his garments, I will get well. And immediately the flood of blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And immediately Jesus, perceiving in himself that power from him had gone out, turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing in on you, and you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see the woman who had done this. But the woman, fearing and trembling, aware of what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be cured of your disease. This woman experienced the love of Christ. He became everything to her. Not only has he healed her, but he was the only one who could heal her. He is God himself. and she feels the love of God. What an incredible consolation. And we were surmising once why she came up in secret, why she tried to sneak this without anybody noticing, without him even noticing. She didn't ask him. She came up, got down, especially in this picture. I mean, it was very surreptitious. So why did she feel the need for secrecy? And there are probably a couple of things. If a man touches a woman who is bleeding, he is automatically unclean and barred from the temple. So it was a big deal. But I think the other thing is she knew that he could heal her, but she didn't know if he would. That's just me thinking. I think, she reached out. She knew he would heal her. Didn't know if he would heal her voluntarily. So she did this. And of course, did he know? I mean, he turned around and said, "Who touched me?" He knew who it was. Right? He wanted her to own up for it, and she did. And she came up and he said, "Your faith has saved you."
Did she touch him, or did she touch his clothes?
Actually his cloak. Yeah.
So he wouldn't get into trouble for that, right?
I think he probably would. It gets very deep theologically. That the Jewish men were afraid to become unclean. If they touched a dead body, they would become unclean. If they touched a leper, they would be unclean. Okay, if they ate meals with pagans, they would be unclean. But the thing about Jesus is Jesus did not become unclean. Instead, it went the other way. He cleansed others. He brought the dead back to life. He healed the lepers. He healed this woman. So he could not be contaminated. He could only send his grace out to people for them to be healed. Okay. So do you think she experienced spiritual consolation or non-spiritual consolation, this woman? Spiritual, yes?
Both.
She experienced physical healing, which is non-spiritual. She experienced spiritual healing, which was, right here. So, okay. Oops. In spiritual consolation, we readily perceive the love of God, and we love him in return. What higher joy can we experience? We can have no greater joy than this. No object, no honor, no pleasure, no power on earth can give us this type of consolation. Only with God can we experience, through the grace of God, this supreme consolation. And of course, the ultimate consolation is the beatific vision when we're in front of Jesus Christ himself in heaven. That is the ultimate consolation. So this woman actually beheld Christ as he was. She knew he was God. So that's got to be one of the highest consolations possible, right? For this, now we're going to look at the experience of one of our most beloved saints, Saint Therese of Lisieux. And this is from a recording. Her sisters were also in the convent, and this was from her sister's journal. Descending the steps into the garden, she saw a little white hen under the tree protecting her little chicks under her wings. Some were peeping out from under. Therese stopped and, looking at them thoughtfully, after a while, I made a sign that we should go inside. I noticed that her eyes were filled with tears, and I said, "You're crying." She put her hand over her eyes and cried even more. Therese said, "I can't explain it just now. I'm too deeply touched." That evening in her cell, she told me the following, and there was a heavenly expression on her face. I cried when I thought of how God used this image in order to teach us his tenderness toward us. All through my life, he has done this for me. He has hidden me totally under his wings. Earlier in the day when I was leaving you, I was crying when going upstairs. I was unable to control myself any longer, and I hastened to our cell. My heart was overflowing with love and gratitude. So that's Therese. So is that spiritual or non-spiritual?
Spiritual.
Spiritual consolation. And it's possible that she was thinking of this verse from the Bible, Matthew 23:37. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often I have desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, yet you were not willing. So I wonder if that played a part in Teresa's thoughts at that moment. I would think so. She knew that Bible. And just as an aside, when we were visiting Jerusalem, I don't remember the name of this church. I think it was Latin.
Dominus Flavit.
Oh, there you go. Write it down for me, Terry. Okay, and this was actually, you can't see it very well right here, but here it was here. And this was actually a rooster, not a hen. Even the non-farm girl knows that's a rooster. But there's the chicks here underneath. So it was kind of, and this window overlooked Jerusalem. You can see the golden dome there. But that was kind of a remarkable thing.
That rooster has a halo, it's Jesus, that's why. It's the altar.
Okay, 2 points. I knew I brought him for a reason, that's my husband.
Mr. Rooster.
You know his halo?
No, that was good. That was good. Okay, here's another example from the Bible, and this is a weeping woman, Luke 7:36. One of the Pharisees asked Jesus to eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and sat at table. And behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner, when she learned that he was sitting at table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment, and standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with the ointment. Now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw it, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of woman this is who was touching him, for she is a sinner. And then turning toward the woman, he said to Simon, do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But he who is forgiven little loves little. And he said to her, your sins are forgiven. And those who were at table with him began to say to themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? And he said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. So this woman was moved to tears for Jesus, and in an ultimate act of humility, I think, washed his feet with her tears and dried it with her hair and anointed his feet. St. Ignatius says, these are blessed and healing tears that express her heart's awareness that perhaps for the first time in her life, she is welcomed, respected, understood, loved, and set free for a new life. And Bishop Robert Barron wrote, she is filled with great love of Christ that overflows in acts of self-offering and service. She breaks her own heart in gratitude. Jesus then says, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. So that's really a pretty remarkable example of consolation. I mean, intense spiritual consolation at this time. So it's just a remarkable story. In the last class, he calls consolation every increase of hope, faith, and charity, and all interior joy that calls and attracts to heavenly things, and to the salvation of one's soul, quieting it and giving it peace in its creator. Okay, it's interesting how Ignatius changes the order of the scriptural order of faith, hope, and love into hope, faith, and love. I guess that's his order of importance. But just imagine a guy named Oliver comes into Mass early. He's had a rough week, and as he kneels in front of the tabernacle, he feels like nothing is going right, and he prays for inspiration at Mass. The gospel reading that day is Luke 5, the calling of St. Peter. He hears how Simon was having a terrible night and probably feeling like Oliver was today. Jesus shows up and all of a sudden tells Simon to do something totally absurd. Simon does it, and the nets fill dramatically and inexplicably. How must Simon have felt? Fishing all night, and then something unbelievable happening. He has fish. More fish than he'd ever netted before in a single night, especially in a single haul. How Simon must have understood in one thunderstruck moment that this couldn't have been chance or accident, but it was a caused event. And the cause was sitting in the boat with him. This moment must have been so powerful that it changed his life, and he never looked back. After listening to the gospel reading, Oliver understands that with Jesus, hope is always present. With hope, the impossible can happen. And he walks out of that church renewed. He has hope. I mean, how many of us have felt that coming to Mass, and it's like the readings are for you, the sermon is for you. You know, it's just an incredible thing how God speaks to you this way. Here's another one. Sylvia comes to Mass just like every other Sunday. She follows along as best she can, although sometimes her attention wanders. She tries to pull her focus back on the Mass. And then at the consecration, the priest lifts up the bread and says, "This is my body." And the reverence with which these words are spoken touch her deeply, and her thought is, it's real. This really is the body of Christ. And suddenly she feels touched in her heart, and the reality of the consecrated host. Her heart is lifted up, and she wants to hold on to that moment. Has anybody had an experience like that? You read about it once in a while. Anybody? I know Patricia Heaton had said publicly, she said she went to Mass and the homily was so off-putting that she went up to communion and she grumbled about how bad the homily was, knelt down and burst into tears having the Eucharist in spite of the bad. She said she couldn't understand what was related to the two, but obviously there was a connection between the two, right? So, yeah, it is pretty remarkable. I remember one time that just really moved me, and I don't even know what the occasion was, but I came up to Mass, and I think we were running late, and probably my mind wasn't with it, and we sat in the back pew on the left side, and I just looked up at the station that's right up there. It's when Jesus fell, one of those times. And if you guys have seen the stations at St. James upstairs, they're just works of art. They're just so beautiful. They're carved in relief and just gorgeous. And I saw that with a Roman soldier with his arm up and the whip, and he's getting ready to strike, and Jesus is on the ground. And I just looked and I said, that really happened. And I started to cry. I'm like, that was so, just awful that this was happening. But it was just that station just touched my heart at that moment. I think everybody has a moment like that. If you're here, you've probably had moments like that. So, but what a great consolation that is. Okay, we're going to consider the love aspect, or charity. The Bible tends to use love and charity interchangeably, and charity comes from God and it's in the form of love, and I think that's why they tend to be used interchangeably. Let's say Sandra comes to Mass early before work as often as she can. It's hard to explain why, but when Mass is over, she partakes of the Eucharist and feels strengthened. She heads to her job, which can be difficult with customers who can be quite rude. She's determined to be patient and charitable when she is the most stressed. So Sandra is committed to go that extra mile to exercise the love in her, the charity in her, because she went to visit Mass. Attracted to heavenly things is in there. So here Ignatius is speaking of a spiritual joy that attracts our gaze to heaven and to the things of salvation. I was speaking to a priest once, and we're going to call him Father Dave, who had trained as a Jesuit. He told me of a fellow seminarian he had once known. He said this man had a way of praying that was just awe-inducing, just to watch him pray. He said this man had a connection to God that he could only guess at, but it was palpable. And he just marveled at how this could happen. And he just really wished he knew how that prayer was from the inside, but of course he didn't. But he could see it on the outside. And after he finished, this other seminarian went on to the missions. And later on, Father Dave found out that he had died a year into the missions. And he fully expects that this man was so holy that there will be a cause for his canonization at one point. But it was a visual thing. It was something he could sense by watching this man pray. So that's just incredible consolation. Okay. There was a time in my family when one of my children was very, very, very sick, and she was critically sick, and I was already in the habit of coming to Mass at 6:45 up here, and when we came to New York, we were learning how to ski, and my instructor was teaching us to make S curves all the way down. And he said that way, when the earth drops out from under you, you're in a pattern. And I have thought of that so often. I came to daily Mass, and when the earth dropped out from under me, I was in a pattern going to daily Mass. And I'd come here before dawn, and I would go up and I'd get the Eucharist, and that was my daily bread. And I knew when I came back to my seat that Jesus was with me to face the day. And I'd walk out of the church and the sun was rising, and I'd say, I'm ready. It was so powerful. It was such a powerful experience. I'm sure a lot of you have felt that way too. Am I right? Yeah? Yeah. If you're here, then I know you felt that way too. Now this is a very interesting couple. Raissa and Jacques Maritain, okay? They were French philosophers. And he was raised in the Protestant religion, but he moved away from it into agnosticism. She was raised as a French Jew, and she also moved away from that faith and was somewhere on the scale of agnosticism, atheism. And they fell in love and got married, but they went into scientism for a while, and then they decided scientism, which is the belief that if science can't prove it, it's not real, which is actually a philosophical statement. These were philosophers. They fell away from scientism, totally disillusioned. And they made a pact with each other. They said, if we can't find a reason to live after a year, we're going to kill ourselves. Right? They're both brilliant. Well, they had a friend by the name of Charles Piguet. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. But he met them and persuaded them to come and check out Catholicism. And 5 years later, they were both baptized, and they both became incredible theologians for the church. In fact, Jacques Maritain became a mentor for Pope Paul VI during Vatican II. They were absolutely brilliant. Okay, now Raissa died in 1960, and she left this journal behind. And after she died, he decided to publish it, and this is from her journal. At the first invocation of the Litany of the Sacred Heart, Kyrie eleison, obliged to absorb myself, my mind arrested on the person of the Father. Impossible to change the object. Sweetness, attraction, eternal youth of the Heavenly Father. Suddenly, a keen sense of his nearness, of his tenderness, of his incomprehensible love, which impels him to demand our love, our thought. Greatly moved, I wept very sweet tears. Joy of being able to call him Father with a great tenderness, to feel him so kind and so close to me. I mean, what a consolation she must have felt at that moment. I mean, it's just amazing. And he dedicated himself to keeping her memory alive and publishing her journal. And they are both now being considered cause for canonization. Okay, we're going to move into the fourth rule now. The fourth rule is of spiritual desolation. And you're like, who wants to talk about that? I mean, seriously. I call desolation all the contrary of the third rule, such as darkness of the soul, disturbance in it, movement to low and earthly things, disquiet from various agitations and temptations, moving to the lack of confidence, without hope, without love, finding oneself totally slothful, tepid, sad, and as if separated from one's Creator and Lord. For just as consolations are the opposite of desolations, in the same way the thoughts that come from consolations are contrary to the thoughts that come from desolations. Okay, we're going to take this apart and study it. And already you can feel the mood in the room just go, right? Okay, but please bear with me because this is one of the most helpful things that Ignatius did. Okay? Spiritual desolation might sound like something that none of us wants to talk about, but in fact, it might be the most valuable lesson that Ignatius has to offer. It's something that all of us experience, and it's vitally important to understand that to be in desolation is nothing to be ashamed of. It doesn't have any reason that we should hide how we are feeling when we're there. It's not a defeat, it's the battle. We need to study it so we can find the path to victory over it. Now, can you tell that was written by a soldier, right? But desolation is the battle. That's when we need God the most. That's when our faith is the most helpful, is when we're in that time. The movement to low and earthly things he talks about. Okay. The low and earthly things he's talking about are the sins of the flesh, including the deadly sins of envy, gluttony. We know what envy is like jealousy, but in envy, my understanding of envy, I can be corrected if there's somebody here who knows more about it than me, which there is. Envy is the wishing of the destruction of the person behind the jealousy. Okay, that's my understanding. Jealousy is not a sin. Envy is a sin. Okay. Gluttony is a hoarding of anything. It could be food. It could be possessions. It could be anything. Greed or avarice, lust, pride, sloth, which is spiritual laziness. That's what sloth is, and wrath, which is unreasonable anger. It is the movement toward sin. As we discussed, it can be just the pull to earthly things, just like wanting to spend time, wasteful time, on my iPhone, on the TV, whatever. And my phone actually never leaves my pocket, so that's a prime concern for me. Okay, I spend a lot. Don't ask my poor husband. I'm on my phone way too much, but he's been great. He's great about it. We talked about how you can tell rule 1 from rule 2 and where these thoughts are taking you. Which direction are you headed? So we're saying you get an idea. Do you know if that idea is coming from the devil or it's coming from God? You can tell by the direction it's leading you. If that rule is leading you to where it is sinful, where it is earthly and low, as Ignatius says, then that's from the devil. If it's leading you up, closer to God, closer to the virtues, closer to love, charity, faith, hope, then you know that's coming from God. Okay. Heavy movements of the heart are sadness, discouragement, hopelessness, anxiety, and other similar feelings are the heavy movements of the heart. Okay, so here's some examples of non-spiritual desolation. Okay, that's what those are. And one can lead to the other. So if you're feeling these things for any reason that don't have to do with spiritual issues, it can convert very easily into spiritual desolation. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. If it's non-spiritual desolation, be careful not to let it convert into a spiritual desolation. We're going to consider a young mother by the name of Alexi. Alexi is a mother of young children, and she arranges for her parents to take the children so she can attend a week-long retreat. Okay, the first day of the retreat, she's filled with joy. She commits to a full day of prayer and in fasting in order to get everything she can out of the retreat. That time is valuable. She wants to use it to the most advantage possible. The second day goes well, and she feels very strong in her faith. On the third day, she wakes up with a headache, and her prayer isn't feeling so good as it was before. She fights the growing sense of hopelessness that seems to emerge out of nowhere. After confiding in this with her spiritual director, he advises her to ease up on her prayer and fasting and rest more. Then the darkness of the soul, heaviness, burden, a sense of things are about to go from bad to worse. It's as if we are in a room and the windows are dirty and we look out and everything is colored. We just can't see clearly. That's the darkness of the soul. And this dirty vision affects our daily lives. And we can carry it around for days, months, or years, and it diminishes our joy. The disturbance of the soul, instead of feeling the pull upward, this pulls us down in a movement to low and earthly things, as we talked about. And it pulls us toward material comfort, gratification of the body, even memories from the past, those painful memories of the past, and immersion of the empty trivia all around us. I mean, you only have to turn on the news nowadays to get immersed in the world, and it's not pretty, especially this week. On day 4, Alexi starts to feeling better. She's feeling alone. Her prayers, instead of feeling better, she's feeling more alone. Her prayers are meaningless. She begins to suspect that the Lord wasn't close to her in those first 2 days, but it was her imagination. Her children miss her and want her home. Then she begins to believe that her desire for God is just an illusion. The other kinds of desolation, what other kind of desolation can Alexi be suffering besides non-spiritual desolation? Do we have a word for that? Anybody?
Night of the soul.
I'm sorry?
Night of the soul. Or...
Well, that dark night, so that's a complicated issue, but close. We would probably call her depressed, right? So, that dark night of the soul is by St. John of the Cross, so he's a different saint. We could get into him sometime. Father Gallagher says that non-spiritual desolation can be caused by a depletion of physical or emotional energy. I mean, that makes sense, right? I mean, Alexi's, young mother, up with kids all night, going to bed late, getting up early, and then she goes to the retreat intent on getting every single drop out of it that she can, and she's spending herself, and she's depleted. So this is kind of what happened. So let's talk about Sid, who's working hard on a project for work, and when it gets done, he receives a disparaging remark from a colleague. I mean, he thought it was a successful project, and somebody just tears it down. I mean, that's emotional depletion right there. So, and that can be a source of non-spiritual desolation, okay? But in Alexi, it's kind of transferring into spiritual desolation. Through the years, Alexi has managed to establish a habit of doing a simple form of the daily examine, and we're going to be doing that later on, probably on the last night of the workshop. So tonight she has no energy. Instead, she just wants to reach for her phone and to thoroughly check out her social media account. How many of us have been there? I have, certainly. Okay, there is no shame in feeling this way. What matters is that Alexi learn where she is spiritually so she can act. So we see this, I don't mean to put that in your way. No. Be aware, understand, and take action. Okay, Ignatius is really big. Be aware of how you're feeling, understand what's happening, and whose voice you're hearing in your heart, and take action. And we're going to learn how to take action in this workshop. So, disquiet from various agitations and temptations. Our hearts are troubled and we suffer from temptations. Okay, why don't I just let the prayer go tonight? Just one night. That's not unreasonable. So who's whispering that?
The enemy.
The enemy is whispering that. Just one night. That's reasonable, right? That's the enemy talking to you. The lack of confidence without hope and without love. In consolation, we experience an increase in faith, hope, and love. In desolation, it's the opposite. We feel very alone and without hope. Alexi feels, why bother? None of your prayers will be answered. It's just a waste of time. And we know who's talking there, right? Instead of trying to carve out time in her busy day, she thinks, your children need you. What are you doing here? Okay, it's that call to separate her from her retreat. She feels an emptiness of God, and she feels alone. Again, there is no shame in feeling this way. Everyone feels this way from time to time. Oops. Okay. Most of us have gotten into a daily prayer routine, and sometimes we just don't feel like doing our routine. That's temptation. What do you do when you're feeling this way? Does anybody have a sure solution? I mean, when you're really struggling and you're like, I'm not into it. I mean, does anybody have a way that they deal with that when those moments come?
Do it anyway.
Do it anyway? All right, Jan, good for you. Anybody else have a trick that you use, or, yeah, John?
I was waiting at her.
Oh, well, you got to come up with something now, John.
I lost my thought train.
Oh, lost your thought train. Anybody else have any? Yeah.
I leave my prayer book out or whatever it was that I was doing and thinking, "Oh, I just don't feel like doing this," and put it aside. I leave it where I can't ignore it. And eventually I'll come back and pick it up again.
Oh, good. So you leave your book out so you can't forget about it, and it's looking at you, and you'll come back later and do what you need to do. That's a good solution. Tina,
I fast until I get my prayers done.
you fast.
I do.
Oh, wonderful.
It forces me to get that done or I go hungry.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
discipline. Very good. Very good.
Yes.
Anybody else have any tricks that you'd like to share with folks? These are good ideas. Anybody? Yeah, Mary.
I don't like to. I do my prayers every day, but on the days when I just something's keeping me from it, I will put the written or the written prayers to the side and just say, God, you know, and I'll sit quietly. I don't like to feel like I have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to do it. I do it because I want to do it. And on a day where I don't like to feel that if I don't, it's because of temptation. Someone's telling me not to.
Mm-hmm.
It's just because of maybe I'm feeling the desolation at that point.
Okay, so you don't force yourself to do it, but instead you said something interesting. You just sit. You
I'll
just
sit.
sit. And actually, according to St. John of the Cross, who we were talking about earlier, that's a higher form of prayer than writing a prayer or saying them verbally. That just to sit, and because God knows. I mean, the Holy
Right.
Spirit knows
Right.
what's inside of you.
Right.
And so he actually thought that was a higher form of prayer, to just sit when.
Right.
And yeah, so great. That's great.
Well, I didn't know that, but I do know this, that this priest said to me one day, he's Monsignor, he said, don't worry when you're in the desolation, because there will always be the consolation.
Yes.
So when you are, or vice versa,
Yes.
don't think you're going to linger too long in this consolation, because it's coming.
Right.
It's
Right.
coming.
They don't last. We're going to talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
One of the things that I do, my poor dogs, is I take them out for a walk, which is actually a good thing. But just to get outside, and it takes my mind off of it. And I typically say the rosary as soon as I start walking. And when I come back, it's just better. I mean, I still might be down, but I don't know, just that change. In the rosary, I say the memorare a lot when I'm really desperate, things like that. So yeah, very good. Thank you for everyone for sharing your tips. Let's see, next one. All right, here's Agnes. Agnes is faithful. Frequently attends Bible studies. However, today she has no energy. She has issues with arthritis every day, and today is no different. So she's in pain. She wonders why she keeps going to the Bible study. Rousing herself, she does go, but it doesn't feel like she gains anything from it. The scriptures feel cold and dry. She can't seem to engage in it. She misses her friends who have passed on. One day follows another, and she's wondering if she will feel God in her life again, and is tempted to think he forgot about her. She feels totally slothful, tepid, and sad. Okay, slothful is no time for God. Agnes is sorely tempted to skip her Bible study, but she does rouse herself to go. Tepid, without fervor, she feels nothing at her Bible study. Still she goes. Sad, without joy, Agnes's sense of sadness increases as days go by and she misses her companions. But it's important to understand that Agnes's love for God has not been lost in here. If you listen to her, you'll hear the positive in where Agnes is. Okay, there is nothing to be ashamed of when she feels like this, and she feels as if separated from one's Creator and Lord. Okay, it's those words "as if" that are the giveaway, because those words "as if" are a lie. Because we know that we are not separated from God. So that as if, it feels as if God has forgotten me. You know who that's coming from? The as if, that's coming from the enemy. And we need to recognize these lies when they come to us. Okay? And this is the promise in Matthew 28:20. I am with you always until the close of the age. And Agnes knows this, and she hasn't given up. And she does go to the Bible study, and she is faithful, even though she doesn't feel like it. So that's how we know that God has given her the grace to persevere, even in the times like she's going through. And He's with us all. Even when we feel like He's far away, we have Matthew 28:20. I am with you always until the close of the age. So we know God is always there regardless of what the message we're getting in our hearts and regardless of how we feel. Okay, 2 lessons from God. One of them He gives, the other He permits. So you know which one He gives, right? What does God give? Consolations. God is the one who gives us the consolations. That's the only way we can get consolations. We can't make consolations happen. We don't have the ability. That is grace that gives us the consolations, right? Consolations cast out, this is a letter to Sister Teresa Rajadel, cast out all uneasiness and draws on to a complete love of our Lord. When this divine consolation is present, all trials are pleasant and all weariness rest. He who goes forward with this fervor, warmth, and interior consolation finds every burden light and sweetness on every penance or trial, however great. It does not remain with us, but will always accompany us on the way at times when that God designates. All is for our progress, and we have to underscore this. It's all for, at times of desolation, we are learning. We are becoming stronger. Okay? So desolations are also important. The other He permits. And He permits, of course, He doesn't give desolations, right? But He permits desolations. Desolations are the other lesson. The enemy makes use of everything to vex us. Everything in the first lesson is reversed. We find ourselves sad without knowing why. Our prayers and contemplations feel empty. We feel forgotten by God. The enemy will suggest that we are entirely forgotten by God, or we are not. It feels that way. We feel forgotten. But that's not the truth, okay? We are not entirely forgotten by God, but that's what He'll tell us. He'll say we are entirely separated from Him, but we know that's a lie too. All that we have done and all that we desire to do is completely worthless. Okay, I can tell you when I was starting this project, I was like, I called the church. I said, can I have the room? And it was Owens Hall, and they said, great. And I said, then I started to work on it, and I thought this was going to be easy. What am I doing? I could be shopping. I could be doing, and I was just like, is anybody even going to come? Thank you all for coming. You have no idea what this means to me. But all that we desire to do is completely worthless. I mean, I was sure. I'm going to give this to 4 people, and there'll be the 4 that I know something about, and I blackmailed them into coming. Okay, but it's not true. These are all lies. Okay, but we can learn from them. Spiritual desolation presents itself as our spiritual identity. Okay, now I want all of us to say this 3 times together. Spiritual desolation presents itself as our spiritual identity. Spiritual desolation presents itself as our spiritual identity. One more time. Spiritual desolation presents itself as our spiritual identity. Okay, we are not desolation. That is not who we are. And that's what the enemy wants to convince us of. He wants to convince us that that is our identity. Okay? Remember Alexi, the young mother who began to think, you are the person who does not love prayer. You are a person who does not love God. Do you see that? And her answer needs to be, no. No, I don't see that. She is just experiencing spiritual desolation today. It's like, who said that? Their spiritual director said, this is gonna pass, and consolations will pass, desolations will pass. So that's how you feel right now. Okay. The truth will set you free, and once we realize this, the desolation loses so much of its power over us. When we recognize the lie for what it is, when we can separate the desolation from who we are and know that you are experiencing this, but it is not you, it is not your identity, you automatically lessen its power over you. Okay? The truth is the light in the darkness. Does anybody have any questions about this? Nobody? Nobody has? I did such a good job. Thank you. Yeah, Melody.
Some people are prone to depression. It may be imbalance, chemical imbalance.
Right.
So how does a person discern whether it's that or it's a spiritual?
Okay. That is a good question. We are talking about most instances or common experiences. There are times when we require the help of a healthcare professional to rule that out and to work with us on it. So that's a really difficult thing to deal with, but with the help of a healthcare professional and a competent spiritual director, I think that's a cross. It's just like, and we'll get into this in the future, but some lifestyles are hard. When you're a parent, and you have little children, guess what? You love them to pieces, right? You love them to pieces. I've got 6. They're a cross. I mean, getting up in the middle of the night when they're sick, cleaning up after them again, listening to them say, do I have to eat that when you've worked all day on the Thanksgiving turkey? You know, I mean, they are a cross, but that's your vocation. You know, a priest is sitting alone in the rectory and he's feeling lonely. That's his vocation. That's his cross. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm not saying that, we can't help each other out here. We have to help each other out. But yeah, depression is a cross. That's an absolute cross. And we do have to find ways to deal with that with a competent professional. And yeah, depression is it can be a real difficult thing. That runs in my family too. So yeah, dealt with that. So anybody else have a question about it? Okay.
The feeling thing. We're not the feeling. We have to remember that we are not the feeling.
Right.
We are not the feeling. I was told that one time.
Yes.
And it resonates with everything you've said and what we read.
Yeah, we are not the feeling. We have to be aware that, especially in desolation, the feeling is a lie, basically. And we'll work on this in the future. It's a good thing there's 6 weeks for this whole thing, because there's so much
There's a lot.
information. But yeah, we have to be aware of who is speaking to us, and the feelings. We have to use our heads, basically, and not count on the feelings. So yeah, that's a good point, Jan. Thank you.
Mary?
Yeah.
It's not a question, but it's a testimonial, because it really does, speak to, how powerful, like the Lord's presence in your life can be. So, like, my story is I was born Catholic, and then after my husband and I got married, shortly after, we got so busy with, practice and kids and involved in so many things that we stepped away from our faith for quite a long time. And we experienced, my husband and I, like spiritual desolation. I mean, we decided to go it alone, and gradually over time, the evil one just worked his way in, and just like every emotion that you talked about on that screen, we experienced, and depression and worthlessness, and and self-doubt, and like there was no harmony or joy. Like we were just getting through the day, and then we found our way back to the Lord and fell in love. And I will say this, I mean, I think having a daily prayer devotional really does help you stay so connected with the Lord in such an intimate way. But I haven't experienced desolation, spiritual desolation, since the day I started doing my rosary daily. This
Wow.
is my daily rosary. That's 3 years ago.
Uh-huh.
So, but the joy that I have in my life now, and I was never diagnosed with depression, but I can tell you, when I look back on those hard years when we were going it alone, it was a struggle to get through a day, and there was very little joy. Am I right, Fran? There was a lot of conflict. And I'm just as busy as I was then, but I have so much more joy in my life. And the only difference in our lives together is the fact that we invited Jesus into our hearts,
Mhm.
and he took care of all the rest.
He took care of the rest.
Yes.
That's great.
So, like, yes, I do agree that there are people who could be clinically depressed and could use help, but
Yeah.
gosh, if you're feeling those things, I think turn to Jesus first and see what the Lord can do for you before you, because I think there is definitely something to that.
Yeah.
If you've turned your back on the Lord,
Yeah.
life is going to be a struggle, and when
Yeah.
you surrender your heart to the Lord.
Yeah. That reminds
there's
me of the
Even in the
Maritains
struggle.
here.
Pardon me?
The Maritains, who had decided if they couldn't find a meaning to life in a year, they were going to kill
Right.
themselves.
Right.
And then they found Christ.
But there's a joy in the struggle when you have Christ. There's
Yeah.
a difference
Yeah,
between
there definitely
being
is.
consumed by the struggle
Yeah.
or being joyful within the struggle.
Yeah.
Because you know you're not going through it alone.
Yeah.
So I
Good
just
point.
wanted to share.
Good
share
point.
that.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Tina. All right. And Cheryl.
I was just gonna say that, the closer that you try to be to Jesus, closer to him, then the evil one comes in a lot and sabotages.
He definitely will.
In a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And once you can start to recognize that, it's not fun when you're going through it, but at least you kind of have an idea of where it's coming from.
Right.
But I find that a lot, like the closer that you try to be to Jesus.
Right.
The struggles that you
Good point. Yeah. Yeah. The evil one will try to get you back. They say that, that there's a story about the house. You sweep the house clean, and then there's nothing there to replace it, and then 7 devils come back where the one was. So I think that, that can happen. But yeah, you're absolutely right. But I got to say, since I learned these rules by St. Ignatius, and I learned to recognize who is speaking to me, I can't even tell you how much easier things have been, and how through the grace of God, I mean, it's God who's doing it. It's God who brings the consolations. But just the difference that it's made in my life. I can, when I feel that non-spiritual consolation come up, and then I feel it evolving into, I don't feel like praying today, I don't feel like doing this, and I'm like, I know what rule that is. And I can counter it. And it just made such a difference to me, and that's why this is my Lenten project here. I'm not giving up anything for Lent. This is it here. So I'm just so grateful to have all of you come. So thank you so much for coming. No, we're not going to have next week. There's going to be the parish mission. So I hope to see some of you at the parish mission, either here or at your church. But we'll meet the following week, and we're going to go until April 6th. We're going to tack on that. We're going to make up that next week. So that'll be good. If anybody wants anything to eat or drink, like you said, help yourselves. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Great job.
Thank you.